Have you ever had a feeling that the story of your life was just a little too perfect? That the picture everyone saw was a little too neatly framed? For 30 years, my life was that picture. My name is Lena Abbott, and the frame around my family was gilded in heroism and respectability. But behind the gold leaf was rot, and it took my mother's death for me to finally see the cracks. Let me set the scene for you. Oakhaven was the kind of town that clung to its myths, and the greatest myth was my father, James Abbott. The story was legend, a rainy night, a swerve to avoid a minivan, a heroic sacrifice. His funeral was a town holiday. My mother, Eleanor, became the saintly widow, a role she played with such grace and quiet strength that no one ever thought to question the script. My brother, David, and I grew up in the long shadow of that saint and that hero. We were the Abbott heirs, living in a beautiful house that felt more like a museum dedicated to a ghost. The first crack appeared not with a bang but with the faint, metallic whisper of a key. It was my great-aunt Clara who delivered it at my mother's funeral. She was a wisp of a woman, tucked away in the family history like a forgotten bookmark. Her hand, cold and bony, closed mine over a small, tarnished silver key. "The oak in the blue bedroom," she breathed, her voice like the rustle of old silk. "She said you're the only one who listens to the silence." The way she said it, it wasn't a tender passing of a memory. It was a warning. She was handing me a live grenade and begging me not to pull the pin. I want you to think about your own family for a second. Is there a mysterious relative, a forgotten story, a locked box somewhere? What's the biggest secret you suspect your family might be keeping? Share it in the comments if you're brave enough. The blue bedroom was my mother's inner sanctum. It was frozen in time, a capsule of her perfume, her dust, her unspoken thoughts. The oak box sat on her vanity. I'd passed it 1,000 times, assuming it held costume jewelry or dried flowers. The key fit perfectly. The turn of the lock wasn't a smooth click. It was a gritty, reluctant screech, a sound that seemed to scream, "Stop! Let us sleep." Inside, the past lay waiting, not in jewels but in paper and faded ink. A photograph of my father, James, but a version of him I'd never seen. He was young, standing knee-deep in the reeds of the Blackwater Marsh, a place my mother had described with a shudder as a soggy, sad place. But it wasn't the location that shocked me. It was his eyes. The confident spark from all our other photos was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrifying despair. He looked like a man staring into his own grave. Beneath the photo, the letters. The one on top was dated October 26th, the day before he died. My father's handwriting, usually so firm and assured, was a frantic, slanted scrawl, as if written in a hurricane. "My dearest Eleanor, I can't carry the weight of it anymore. It's in the water I drink, the air I breathe. I see it in the boys' eyes when they look at me. What I did, it wasn't to save us. It was to save myself from the shame. I am a coward. The marsh knows. It has always known. It's calling me back to settle the debt of a life. Forgive me if you can. All my love always. James." I read it once, then again. The words didn't just shatter my image of my father, they vaporized it. The heroic car crash was a lie. The unshakable character the town praised was a fiction. My father had taken his own life, driven by a guilt so profound he called it a debt of a life. And my mother, she hadn't just known. The letter was addressed to her. She was a part of it. Put yourself in my shoes for a moment. Your entire identity is built on a lie. What goes through your mind? Is it anger, betrayal, a desperate need for the truth? Tell me what you would be feeling in the comments. The debt, the marsh, the Sinclair boy mentioned in other letters. I became a woman possessed. I spent the next week in the Oakhaven Library, a place that smelled of decaying paper and forgotten stories. Mrs. Higgins, the librarian, smiled sympathetically, assuming I was compiling a tribute. I was, in a way, a tribute to a truth that had been murdered. The microfiche machine whirred, spooling through decades of town gossip and bake sales. And then I found him, Thomas Sinclair. His smiling face in a high school graduation photo, his life reduced to a 3-paragraph article, local youth reported missing. He had vanished into the Blackwater Marsh on a stormy night 3 weeks before my father's accident. The official cause, probable drowning. A tidy, tragic, and conveniently unprovable ending. But when I requested the physical bound volumes from that year, the story changed. The leather cover was thick with dust. I found the front page article lauding my father's heroism. But when I turned the page, my blood ran cold. The next 2 pages, the continuation, the obituary, the community mourning, were gone, not faded, not torn. They had been surgically excised with a razor blade, leaving only jagged, pathetic scraps clinging to the spine. This was no accident. This was a calculated, clinical act of erasure. This was my mother's handwriting, not in ink, but in absence. I drove to the wrong side of the river, to a part of Oakhaven the Abbott family never had to see. The Sinclair house was a skeleton, its paint peeling like dead skin. Maeve Sinclair answered the door, her body small and stooped, but her eyes held the ferocity of a hawk that had spent 30 years circling the same painful patch of sky. "You have his eyes," she said, not as a compliment but as an accusation. She led me into a living room that was a shrine. Photographs of Thomas at every age smiled down, a lifetime of joy frozen on the walls. She told me about her son, not the victim from the newspaper but the boy who loved to sketch birds, who wanted to travel, who was hopelessly, recklessly in love with a girl from a family that would never accept him. They argued over her, Maeve said, her voice a low, steady flame. A week before he disappeared, everyone saw it. And the night of the storm, old man Henderson saw your father, James Abbott, running from the marsh, covered in mud, looking like he'd seen the devil himself. She leaned forward, her gaze pinning me to my seat. "I told the sheriff. I told everyone who would listen. But your grandfather was the sheriff. The Abbott name was a wall nobody could break through. They buried my boy in that marsh, and then they buried the truth under their money and their influence." I left her house, the weight of her grief a physical pressure on my chest. The debt was a life. My father was a killer, but Maeve's story left a burning question. Who was the girl? I returned to the oak box, my hands no longer trembling but steady with a cold, focused rage. I read every letter, searching for a name, a clue, and I found it in a letter dated a month before Thomas vanished. The handwriting was my father, but the tone was different, panicked, possessive. "Alina, he knows, Thomas knows about us. He confronted me today outside the post office. He said he's going to tell your father everything. He says he loves you, that you'll choose him. His arrogance is staggering. We have to meet him. We have to end this. Tonight, at the marsh." The world tilted. The girl wasn't a stranger. The girl, the source of the argument, the object of their affections, was my mother. The saintly widow had been at the very center of the storm. This is the twist that changes everything. How do you view the mother now? Is she a victim caught between two men or something more calculating? Let me know your theory in the comments. I didn't go to my brother David's house. I stormed it. It was past midnight. I found him in his study, surrounded by the artifacts of the life he'd built, the polished diplomas, the photos with local politicians. He was the keeper of the Abbott flame, and I was about to douse it with gasoline. When I threw the letters on his desk and said Thomas Sinclair's name, he didn't flinch. He didn't deny it. He just deflated. The charismatic mask of David Abbott, community pillar, slipped away, and beneath it was just a tired, terrified man. "He told me," David whispered, his voice cracking. "The year before he died, he was drunk, sobbing on this very floor. It was an accident, Lena, a stupid, bloody accident." He told me the story I now knew by heart, the meeting in the marsh, the argument over our mother, the shove, the fall. But he added a detail that made my skin crawl. When Dad ran home, it was Mom who was calm. It was Mom who grabbed a backpack, who found the rope and the rocks from the garden. She was the one who said, "We protect this family, no matter what." The lie wasn't born of panic, it was engineered. My mother, Alina, was the architect. As I turned to leave, my eye caught an anomaly on his bookshelf, a worn, ledger-style book tucked between legal texts. I pulled it out. It was my grandfather's personal journal from his time as sheriff. David lunged forward. "Lena, don't." But it was too late. I flipped to October of that year. The entry was brief and devastating. Maeve Sinclair reported Tommy missing. Henderson's story checks out. Saw James running from the marsh, scared out of his wits. Interviewed James and Alina. Their story is too clean, too rehearsed. My boy is lying. My gut is a knot, but he's my son. The Abbott name is this town. I closed the case. Told the state police we had it handled. I have to protect my own. God forgive me. 3 generations. 3 generations of Abbotts had chosen the family name over a human life. The conspiracy was an heirloom, passed down like a cursed pocket watch. I took the journal and the letters to Detective Miller. I watched his face cycle through pity, disbelief, and finally, a grim, professional resolve. A week later, the dredgers arrived at the Blackwater Marsh. The mechanical groans of the machines felt like the town's skeleton being wrenched from its grave. For 2 days, they found nothing but mud and rusted junk. The hope I'd clung to began to feel like a childish delusion. Then on the 3rd day, a shout cut through the mechanical noise. The crew gathered around a fresh pile of silt. Detective Miller waved me over, his face pale. "Lena, you should stay back." But I pushed forward. There in the foul-smelling muck was a jumble of stained bones. It was horrifying, but it was the smaller discovery that stopped my heart. Tangled in the roots was a flash of silver. A locket. The detective, with a gloved hand, carefully pried it open. The mud fell away to reveal a black-and-white photograph of a young woman, her smile shy, her eyes full of light. It was my mother, Alina, young, beautiful, and loved. Thomas Sinclair had gone to his death with her image resting over his heart, the final physical proof. The aftermath was a quiet apocalypse. The news story spread like a stain. Local hero exposed as killer. Generations-long cover-up UNRAVELS. David's law firm bled clients overnight. His wife, unable to face the scandal, left him and took their children. The fortress of the Abbott name was not just breached, it was systematically dismantled, brick by brick. The final severance came in a thick legal envelope. It wasn't from a reporter, it was from David's lawyer. It was a formal separation agreement. The language was cold, precise. The parties agree to have no further contact, direct or indirect, in perpetuity. My brother, my only remaining family, had legally erased me from his life. The destruction was complete. I was the last Abbott, alone in a house of ghosts. I moved to a small, rented cabin on the far side of the marsh. The silence there was different. It wasn't the heavy, secret-laden silence of my family home. It was the silence of the land, a silence I had to learn to bear. But the story, it seemed, was not done with me. An email arrived from a woman named Sarah, who identified herself as Thomas Sinclair's cousin. She wasn't angry. She was seeking a different kind of closure. We met in a neutral cafe. She was a gentle woman with the same kind eyes Thomas had in his photos. She slid 2 items across the table. The first was a plastic evidence bag containing a faded but legible one-way train ticket to Boston. It was dated for the morning after Thomas disappeared. "He was really leaving," Sarah said softly. "He'd been accepted to a trade school. He was going to be an electrician. He told me he was going to build a new life, a good life. He was so full of hope." The tragedy deepened. My father hadn't just killed a boy. He had crushed a future, erased a potential family, silenced a life of promise. The second item was a small ceramic heron, glazed a breathtaking, stormy blue. "He made this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "He loved the marsh. He'd spend hours out there, sketching, finding clay, making these little sculptures. He found beauty there, until your family turned it into his grave." I held the heron. It was cool and smooth in my hand. It was the most beautiful and devastating thing I had ever held. This was Thomas. Not a victim, not a secret, but an artist. This new knowledge was a different kind of grief, more profound and more personal. It compelled me to break the no-contact order. I didn't call David. I went to the old playground where we played as children, a place untouched by the Abbott legacy. I called him and simply said, "I'm at the swings." He hung up. But 20 minutes later, his car pulled into the lot. He looked broken, stripped of his armor. I showed him the ticket and the heron. I told him about Thomas's dream. "I know," he said, his voice a ragged whisper. "Mom found out a few years later. She kept it to herself." I think it haunted her more than the act itself. Knowing he was leaving, it made what Dad did even more pointless. We sat in silence for a long time, the chains of the swings creaking a familiar childhood rhythm. "They didn't just lie to us, David," I said finally. "They made us part of the lie, you by forcing you to know and me by forcing me to be ignorant. We were both their prisoners." He looked at me, and for the first time I saw my brother, not the heir, not the accomplice. "So what do we do now?" he asked. "We get to be free," I replied. It wasn't an instant reconciliation. It was a slow, painful process of building a new relationship from the rubble. We started having dinners. The conversations were awkward, filled with landmines of memory, but they were honest. I also began a slow, tentative correspondence with Maeve Sinclair. I sent her a photograph of the heron on my windowsill. She wrote back a brief note. He would have liked knowing it was there, watching over the place he loved. We would never be friends, but we had reached an armistice across the river of our shared pain. The legal case was officially closed. With all the perpetrators dead, there were no arrests, no trials. Justice was a bureaucratic notation, but peace was something we had to build for ourselves day by difficult day. One evening, David showed up at my cabin with a cardboard box. "Cleaning out the last storage unit," he said. Inside were not the formal portraits but the real photos. Our father, laughing, his arm around our mother at a beach picnic. Our mother, young and vibrant, smiling at something just beyond the camera, a look I now wondered was meant for Thomas. We looked at them not as heroes or monsters, but as people. Deeply, tragically flawed people who made an unforgivable choice that rippled through time and destroyed everything they were trying to protect. The secret my family buried for 30 years did exactly what I feared it would. It destroyed us. It obliterated our name, our wealth, our standing, and very nearly our bond as brother and sister. But from the scorched earth of that total destruction, something began to grow, something fragile but real. A relationship between two survivors chosen, not inherited. A quiet understanding with a woman who had every reason to hate me. And a hard-won peace, found in the quiet resilience of a marsh that had witnessed it all. The love, the violence, the lies, and finally, the truth. So I have to ask you, after hearing this entire sprawling saga, knowing the total cost, the family destroyed, the lives ruined, was the truth worth it? Could you have carried that secret to your grave, or would you have done exactly what I did? Leave your final judgment in the comments. If this story has captivated you, if you felt every twist and turn, then do this for me. Like this video. Subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into true stories of secrets, lies, and the redemption that follows. Hit that bell icon. You won't want to miss what we uncover next. Your support is what allows us to bring these hidden histories to light. I still have the ceramic heron. I still walk the marsh. The land remembers, but it no longer whispers accusations. It just exists, enduring and constant. And so do I, Lena Abbott, the last of my line, the keeper of the story. A living testament that even from the most poisoned ground, after the fire has burned everything away, something new, honest, and resilient can finally take root.